Bride humiliates a poor pregnant woman at her wedding, unaware she's exposing a dark secret. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The wedding looked like something out of a magazine. Soft white lights hung over a wide green lawn, and a glass hall stood in the middle of the countryside. Music floated through the air while guests laughed, holding champagne glasses and talking about vacations and business deals. Everything was polished and perfect, just the way the bride wanted it. Madeline Carter stood at the center of it all. She wore a custom gown, her hair perfectly styled, her smile full of pride. This day was about showing the world how far she had risen. Every detail mattered, from the flowers to the guest list. She loved the attention and the quiet envy she felt from others. As dinner was about to begin, the doors at the back of the hall opened. A woman stepped inside slowly. She was clearly pregnant, holding her belly as she walked. Her dress was clean but simple, and her shoes looked old. She paused for a moment, unsure, then continued forward. Her name was Hannah Brooks. Some guests turned to look. Their smiles faded into confusion. She didn't belong to this picture-perfect scene. Whispers moved through the room. Madeline noticed her almost immediately. Her face changed, just for a second, before hardening into something cold. Madeline walked toward her without hesitation. Her heels clicked loudly on the floor, drawing attention. The music lowered, and conversation stopped. Madeline looked Hannah up and down, then laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was sharp and meant to hurt. She spoke loudly, asking how someone like Hannah even found the place. She commented on her clothes, her pregnancy, and her presence. Her words were wrapped in fake humor, but the meaning was clear. She wanted Hannah to feel small. She wanted everyone to see it. A few guests laughed nervously. Others looked away, embarrassed but silent. No one stepped in. The room felt tight, heavy with discomfort. Madeline kept going, enjoying the control, enjoying the moment. She spoke about bad choices and low standards, never once lowering her voice. Hannah didn't cry. She didn't shout back. She stood still, her hands resting gently on her stomach. Her face was calm, though her eyes carried something deep and unreadable. She looked around the room, at the people judging her without knowing her, and then back at Madeline. The silence that followed was louder than the music had been. Madeline smiled, satisfied, believing she had won. To her, Hannah was just a reminder of a past she thought she had buried. She assumed Hannah would turn around and leave in shame. But Hannah didn't move. No one in that room understood why she had come. No one knew that this moment, meant to break her, was only the beginning of something Madeline never saw coming. Years before the wedding, Hannah Brooks lived a very different life. She moved into the Carter family home as a live-in caregiver when Richard Carter's health began to fail. He was weak, often in pain, and needed constant support. Hannah was young, quiet, and serious about her work. She cooked his meals, helped him walk, managed his medicine, and stayed up through long nights when his breathing grew rough. She treated him with patience and respect, never rushing him, never complaining. Richard noticed this. He had been surrounded by people his whole life, but few truly listened to him. Hannah did. She spoke to him like he still mattered. Over time, he began to trust her. He shared stories about his past, his regrets, and the mistakes he believed he had made with his family. Hannah became someone he depended on, not just for care, but for honesty and calm. Madeline lived in the same house during part of that time, but she rarely acknowledged Hannah's presence. To her, Hannah was just hired help. She never learned her story, never asked her name properly, and never thanked her. When guests came over, Madeline would speak around Hannah as if she wasn't in the room. That quiet dismissal hurt more than open insults, but Hannah stayed focused on her work. As months passed, Hannah grew closer to Richard. He trusted her with personal matters and often asked her opinion on things he wouldn't discuss with anyone else. He respected her judgment. This only deepened Madeline's cold attitude. She didn't like seeing her father rely on someone she considered unimportant. Then, without warning, Hannah left the house. There was no goodbye, no explanation. One day she was there, the next she was gone. Madeline didn't ask questions. She made her own assumptions. In her mind, Hannah had failed, taken what she could, and disappeared once things got difficult. She told others that Hannah had been after money and couldn't handle real responsibility. What Madeline didn't know was the truth behind Hannah's sudden departure. Hannah had left quietly, carrying more than just her bags. She was pregnant, scared, and alone. She didn't want pity, and she didn't want conflict. She chose distance over drama, believing it was safer for everyone. Before Hannah left, Richard had called her into his room one last time. He knew his time was limited. He spoke carefully and seriously, making sure she understood how important his words were. He placed his trust in her, not because of sympathy, but because he believed she was the only person who would honor his wishes without greed or anger. Hannah didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't see herself as special or powerful. She simply agreed to do what was right when the time came. After Richard passed away, Madeline believed everything had been settled in her favor. She never questioned it. She never imagined that the quiet caregiver she once ignored had walked away holding something that would one day change everything Madeline thought she owned. The room slowly returned to its noise after the laughter faded. Madeline felt a rush of satisfaction settle inside her. In her mind, she had handled an inconvenience and reminded everyone who was in control. She straightened her shoulders and walked back toward the center of the hall, smiling as if nothing had happened. This wedding was more than a celebration for her. It was proof. Proof that she had won at life. She was marrying Ethan Wells, a man known for his success in real estate, a man whose name opened doors. Madeline believed wealth defined value. To her, money wasn't just comfort, it was identity. Standing beside Ethan made her feel untouchable. She picked up a glass and began talking loudly with a group of guests nearby. Her voice carried across the room. She joked about how freeing it was to cut toxic people out of her life, especially those who refused to improve themselves. Her words were sharp but dressed as humor. A few people nodded along. Others forced smiles, unsure how to react. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting loosely at her back. His expression didn't match hers. He glanced toward the exit, then back at Madeline. The scene replayed in his mind, and the laughter from moments earlier now felt wrong. Still, he said nothing. The celebration had too many eyes on it, and silence felt easier than confrontation. Across the room, Hannah stood near the doorway. She hadn't moved since the moment Madeline finished speaking. Her hands were steady, her breathing slow. The weight of the room pressed against her, but she stayed upright. A few guests looked at her with curiosity now, no longer amused, but confused by her composure. Madeline noticed this from the corner of her eye. It bothered her. She expected tears, anger, or shame. That was how these moments usually ended. But Hannah remained calm, her face neutral, her posture firm. It felt unnatural to Madeline, almost disrespectful. Madeline whispered something to a bridesmaid and laughed again, louder this time. She wanted to force the moment closed. She wanted Hannah gone. Every second Hannah stayed made Madeline feel unsettled, though she didn't understand why. Hannah didn't look at Madeline. She looked ahead, as if waiting for something. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was control. She had walked into this room knowing exactly what could happen. She had prepared herself for the stares, the words, the judgment. None of it surprised her. Madeline mistook that calm for defeat. She assumed Hannah was frozen, too ashamed to move, too broken to respond. She turned away, confident the story had ended in her favor. But Hannah stayed where she was. And that quiet choice, unnoticed by most, planted the first crack in Madeline's perfect day. After standing quietly for several minutes, Hannah finally moved. She walked slowly toward the long table where the wedding gifts were placed. The sound of her steps drew attention again, and nearby conversations faded. A few guests watched with raised brows, unsure of what she was doing. Hannah stopped beside the wedding coordinator, a woman holding a clipboard and smiling politely out of habit. Hannah reached into her bag and took out a small envelope. It was plain, clean, and carefully sealed. She handed it over and asked softly that it be given to the bride. Her voice was calm, steady, and free of anger. The coordinator hesitated for a moment but nodded and walked toward Madeline. When Madeline saw the envelope, her expression turned amused. She took it without reading the front and turned to face the room, clearly expecting entertainment. She opened it in front of everyone. At first, she smirked, ready to laugh. Then her smile tightened. Inside was a folded document, thick and official. She scanned the top line, then the bottom. The color drained slightly from her face. The room went quiet. Glasses paused mid-air. Music softened. Madeline let out a short laugh, sharp and forced. She held the paper up and joked that anyone could print something like this. Her laugh echoed, but no one joined in this time. Hannah took a few steps forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush her words. She simply spoke when the room was still enough to hear her. She said that Richard had asked her to deliver that document only under one condition. She looked directly at Madeline and said that condition had just been met. The words settled heavily in the air. Madeline's hand tightened around the paper. She looked down again, scanning the signature, the date, the official stamp. Her confidence began to crack. She laughed again, quieter this time, and shook her head as if disbelief alone could erase what she was seeing. Guests leaned closer. Some whispered. Others watched in silence. The mood had changed completely. What had been a celebration now felt tense, fragile, like a moment on the edge of something irreversible. Hannah didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Her message was clear. This wasn't a joke, and it wasn't revenge spoken in anger. It was something planned long ago, something meant to protect, not provoke. Madeline looked up, searching the room for reassurance. She didn't find it. Faces that once smiled at her now held uncertainty. The attention she loved so much no longer felt warm. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. What Madeline believed was control slipped from her grasp, replaced by a quiet fear she could no longer laugh away. The document was passed around quietly to someone with legal knowledge among the guests. The silence in the room grew heavier as the truth slowly unfolded. What was written there wasn't emotional or dramatic. It was clear, formal, and final. Richard Carter had made arrangements long before his death. He had transferred control of several properties into a legal trust. These properties were the ones that produced steady income, the ones that kept money flowing year after year. According to the document, Hannah Brooks was named as the executor of that trust. Her role was to protect it and manage it until Richard's grandchild reached the age of 25. As the words were read and understood, confusion turned into shock. Madeline's face stiffened. She tried to speak but couldn't find the right words. Her hands trembled slightly as the reality began to settle in. Then came the part no one expected. The child Hannah was carrying was not a stranger to the Carter family. The document clearly stated the child's bloodline. Hannah had once been in a relationship with Richard's son, Madeline's older brother. He had been distant from the family for years before his death, and his name was rarely spoken. That relationship had been kept private, protected by Richard himself. Richard had known the truth. He had accepted it. And he had planned for it. Madeline had never been told any of this. Her father had made that choice deliberately. He feared that if she knew, greed would cloud her judgment. He believed she would try to control or destroy what he wanted to protect. So he kept his plans hidden, trusting Hannah instead. The wealth Madeline spoke so proudly about, the lifestyle she believed was secure, was not fully hers. It had conditions. It had limits. And those limits were now standing in front of her. Guests exchanged stunned looks. Some covered their mouths. Others slowly stepped back, as if distance could separate them from the weight of the moment. The story Madeline had built around herself began to fall apart piece by piece. Hannah remained quiet as the truth settled. She didn't defend herself or explain her past. She didn't need to. Everything important was already written. Madeline felt exposed. Not because of gossip, but because of facts she could not twist or deny. Her father had seen something in her that he feared. And now, in front of everyone, that fear made sense. The room no longer saw a confident bride celebrating her future. They saw a woman realizing that what she believed she owned had never truly been under her control. Madeline's shock quickly turned into anger. Her face tightened, and her voice rose as she pointed at Hannah. She accused her of lying, of planning everything, of manipulating her father when he was weak. Her words came fast and loud, filling the room with sharp energy. She said Hannah had always wanted money and was now trying to steal what didn't belong to her. She turned to Ethan and demanded he remove Hannah immediately. She told him this woman was ruining their wedding and embarrassing them in front of everyone. Her voice shook with rage, not confidence. For the first time that day, she sounded desperate. Ethan didn't move right away. He looked at Madeline, then at Hannah. His expression was no longer calm. It was confused and uneasy. He asked one simple question. He wanted proof. Hannah nodded quietly. She opened her bag and took out a small folder she had been carrying the entire time. She handed it forward without drama. Inside were handwritten letters from Richard. His words were clear and personal, written over time, explaining his decisions and his reasons. The handwriting was familiar to those who had seen it before. Hannah then placed sealed documents on the table. These included official DNA results and legal confirmations. Everything was stamped, dated, and signed. There was no emotion in the papers, only truth. Whispers spread through the room. Guests leaned toward one another, speaking in low voices. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked at Madeline with quiet judgment. The celebratory feeling was gone completely. The officiant, sensing the moment was no longer appropriate, quietly stepped away from the front. No one noticed at first. All attention was focused on the collapse happening in the center of the room. Madeline grabbed the edge of a chair to steady herself. Her anger faded into something else, panic. She looked around, searching for support, but found only distance. The people who once laughed with her now avoided her eyes. In that moment, the truth hit her fully. The life she enjoyed, the confidence she carried, the control she believed she had, all rested on assets she did not truly own. She had spoken loudly about power and status without understanding the foundation beneath her feet. Hannah stood quietly, her hands resting over her stomach. She didn't argue back. She didn't smile. She simply waited. There was nothing left to say. Madeline's voice dropped to a whisper as she tried to deny it all again, but the room no longer believed her. Her cruelty earlier had drawn attention. Her insults had invited scrutiny. And now, that same spotlight exposed how little she actually knew. The silence that followed was heavy and final. What Madeline had meant as humiliation had turned into her own undoing, and she realized it too late to stop it. Ethan took a step closer to Madeline, lowering his voice but not enough to hide his words from those nearby. His tone was calm, but firm. He asked her why she had never told him any of this. He wanted to know why the finances she spoke about so confidently came with conditions she never mentioned. Madeline tried to interrupt him, but he continued. He said he had watched the way she spoke to Hannah, the way she mocked her in front of everyone. He admitted he didn't like what he saw. The woman standing in front of him didn't match the person he believed he was marrying. Madeline defended herself, saying Hannah deserved it, that none of this would have happened if she hadn't shown up. Ethan shook his head. He told her that someone's presence never justifies cruelty. His words were simple, but they landed hard. A few guests nearby grew quiet, listening closely. No one laughed now. No one looked entertained. The attention Madeline once controlled had shifted, and she could feel it. Ethan turned toward Hannah. He walked a few steps closer and spoke directly to her. He apologized for not stepping in earlier. He admitted that staying silent had been a mistake. His voice carried sincerity, not guilt meant for show. Hannah nodded slowly. She didn't respond with anger or gratitude. She simply acknowledged his words. For the first time since entering the room, she was being spoken to with respect. The mood changed again, softer but heavier. Guests who had avoided Hannah's gaze earlier now looked at her differently. Some offered small nods. Others stepped aside to give her space. Without anyone announcing it, the room had decided who deserved dignity. Madeline stood frozen. She felt something slipping away, but it wasn't money. It was influence. It was the control she held through confidence and volume. The room no longer reacted to her the way it once did. She tried to speak again, to reclaim the moment, but her words felt hollow. Ethan didn't look at her the same way. Guests didn't either. The image she worked so hard to build was cracking, not because of documents or wealth, but because her behavior had been witnessed without excuses. Hannah remained still, grounded, her presence calm. She hadn't raised her voice once, yet the room listened to her more than it had listened to Madeline all day. Madeline realized then that the attention she lost wouldn't come back easily. People had seen her clearly, and once that happens, no amount of pride can cover it again. Hannah finally spoke again, but not to argue and not to defend herself. Her voice was steady and low, forcing the room to quiet down. She said she never came there to embarrass anyone. She never wanted revenge. All she had ever wanted was respect and the right to exist without being attacked. She explained that she had avoided this moment for years. She built her life quietly, away from the Carter family, and never planned to return. Coming to the wedding was not a choice driven by anger. It was a responsibility she could no longer avoid. Hannah explained that the trust included a clear instruction. If Madeline ever tried to harm her publicly, the documents had to be delivered in person, with witnesses present. That condition was written to protect Hannah and the child, not to punish anyone. She had hoped it would never be triggered. She paused briefly, then looked at Madeline and thanked her. Not sarcastically. Not cruelly. She thanked her for making the delivery possible by her own actions. The words hit harder than any insult could have. There was no shouting. No accusations. Just truth, spoken calmly and clearly. The room felt still, like everyone was holding their breath. Hannah didn't raise her voice or repeat herself. She didn't need to. Madeline's face crumpled. The anger drained from her, replaced by disbelief and regret. Her hand shook as she tried to speak, but nothing came out. The realization was sharp and painful. She hadn't been attacked. She had triggered everything herself. She had believed power came from dominance, from humiliating others before they could threaten her. Instead, that same behavior had exposed her ignorance and fear. The more she tried to control the situation, the faster it slipped away. Madeline lowered herself into a chair, overwhelmed. Tears filled her eyes, not because she had lost money, but because she had lost the version of herself she believed in. The room no longer saw her as confident or superior. They saw her as careless with cruelty. Hannah watched quietly. There was no satisfaction on her face. No smile. This wasn't victory to her. It was closure. She had followed the law, honored Richard's wishes, and protected her child without attacking anyone. Guests stayed silent. No one comforted Madeline. No one blamed Hannah. The truth had settled, and it felt final. Hannah adjusted her bag and prepared to leave. She had said everything that needed to be said. The revenge Madeline feared never came in the form she expected. It came through calm, restraint, and honesty. As Hannah walked toward the exit, the room parted for her without a word. Madeline remained seated, staring at the floor, finally understanding that the damage she suffered was not done by Hannah, but by her own hands. The wedding did not continue the way it was planned. Music was turned off, and dinner was never served. Guests began leaving one by one, some without saying a word. Others offered short, uncomfortable goodbyes, avoiding eye contact with Madeline. The celebration that was meant to last all night ended in quiet confusion. Madeline stayed where she was, standing in the middle of the room as people walked past her. No one asked if she was okay. No one tried to comfort her. The admiration she expected on her wedding day was gone. What replaced it was distance. Ethan spoke briefly with a few people, then returned to Madeline. His voice was calm but firm. He told her the wedding could not continue. There was too much unresolved truth between them. He said they needed time, space, and honesty before anything else. He made it clear the marriage would be postponed. Madeline didn't argue this time. She looked exhausted, drained of anger and pride. She nodded slowly, as if the weight of the day had finally settled on her shoulders. In the days that followed, reality became unavoidable. Financial advisors contacted Madeline to explain what the documents meant. The trust was real. Its authority was firm. The properties she believed supported her lifestyle were no longer under her control. Decisions she once made freely now required approval she didn't have. The calls were professional and cold. There was no sympathy, only facts. Madeline listened, silent, realizing how much she had taken for granted. The security she believed was permanent had conditions she never bothered to understand. Hannah, meanwhile, moved forward quietly. She returned to her life without seeking attention or praise. She focused on her health and her child. The future Richard had planned was now in motion, not as a reward, but as protection for his grandchild. She felt relief, not triumph. The truth was no longer a burden she carried alone. She could prepare for motherhood with stability and peace, knowing she was honoring the responsibility given to her. Madeline faced a different future. One without automatic respect, without the confidence that money once gave her. She had to confront who she was without an audience that admired her. The silence around her was louder than the laughter ever was. She began to understand that control, once lost, is not easily regained. People don't forget how you made them feel, especially when they see it clearly. What remained was accountability. Not imposed by law alone, but by the quiet judgment of those who had witnessed everything. The wedding was over. The image was broken. And life, unchanged by pride or denial, moved forward for everyone involved. Hannah sat quietly in her new home a few days after the wedding. The house was calm, warm, and filled with sunlight. She thought about everything that had happened that day. The tension, the humiliation, the shock on Madeline's face, it all came back clearly in her mind. But she didn't feel satisfaction from revenge. She felt peace. She reminded herself that she had never wanted to hurt Madeline. She had only wanted respect and fairness. All her actions had been guided by what Richard had entrusted to her, and the responsibility she carried for the child growing inside her. Every step she had taken was careful, thoughtful, and lawful. She had followed the rules and let truth speak for itself. Hannah realized that the real victory wasn't in the shock or embarrassment she caused. It was in remaining calm and composed while letting Madeline's own arrogance and cruelty show who she really was. The wedding had been a stage, and Madeline had performed for everyone's eyes. Her pride, her assumptions, and her harsh words had done more to reveal her character than anything Hannah could have said or done. She thought about the people who had witnessed everything. Guests had seen a woman stand quietly, without raising her voice, yet commanding respect. They had seen someone with dignity face cruelty and still remain in control. That mattered more than any fleeting moment of humiliation. Hannah felt that her own strength had come from patience and quiet confidence. As for Madeline, Hannah knew the lesson had been harsh but necessary. The bride had built her life on assumptions and pride, and that very pride had been her undoing. No one could take away the reality that Hannah now had: security for her child, clarity about her own worth, and the respect she had always deserved. Hannah also thought about her child. Every decision she had made had been for the future of this little one. She had ensured safety, protection, and a solid foundation. That responsibility made her stronger than any anger or desire for revenge ever could. It reminded her of what really mattered in life. In the quiet of her home, she smiled softly, feeling relief. She had protected what was most important. She had proven that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it is silent, steady, and unshakable. She had let life and truth do the work, and they had. Hannah's mind returned to one thought over and over: the most powerful form of revenge is not revenge at all. It is showing who you are, standing firm, and letting others reveal themselves. Pride and cruelty cannot hide forever. People will see it on their own, and you don't need to lower yourself to expose them. She took a deep breath, resting her hands over her belly. The future was hers to shape. She felt calm, ready, and protected. She had survived cruelty, faced humiliation, and come out stronger. She had learned that dignity, patience, and truth are stronger than anger or hatred. And in that knowledge, she finally felt at peace.